saving drug, the inexpensive steroid, and tonight, researchers now saying it cuts the death rate by a third for patients on ventilators. Is this a breakthrough, and how readily available is it in the U.S.? Meantime, the record numbers being seen in this country as this nation reopens. The major news from Florida, Texas, Arizona, and other states. The governor of Texas tonight and his frustration over young people not wearing masks. And California reporting nearly half of those now testing positive are under the age of 35. And what Dr. Anthony Fauci is now acknowledging tonight about why Americans were not told to wear masks from the start. The American F-15 that went down, and what we've learned tonight about the pilot and this last video for his wife. News on the toddlers who went over a cliff with their father, the rescue. And what the NFL commissioner is now saying about Colin Kaepernick, now urging teams to hire him back.
This is ABC World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us here on a very busy Tuesday night. News on the coronavirus in the U.S., a potential breakthrough, and the potential emergency playing out again in China tonight. But we're going to begin with President Trump on policing in America. After 3 weeks of protests calling for change, President Trump in an emotional meeting behind closed doors with families of victims. And then the president in the Rose Garden today signing an executive order recommending restricting chokeholds to be used only if an officer's life is in danger, but not a mandatory ban. He said police departments should share abuse complaints about officers. The president also insisting, quote, Americans want law and order, adding some of them don't even know that's what they want. But with protests across this country, the president did not address racism in America and what the families who met with the president said afterward. Our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl, leading us off tonight.
The president's speech today in the Rose Garden started out as a plea for unity.
To all of the hurting families, I want you to know that all Americans mourn by your side. Your loved ones will not have died in vain.
But the president quickly turned to tough talk about law and order.
Americans want law and order. They demand law and order. Some of them don't even know that's what they want, but that's what they want.
The event was called for the president to sign an executive order the White House billed as an effort to address the issues raised by the protests across the country in the wake of the killing of George Floyd. But the president spent most of his remarks defending law enforcement.
But I strongly oppose the radical and dangerous efforts to defend, dismantle, and dissolve our police departments. Americans know the truth. Without police, there is chaos.
His opponent, Joe Biden, says he doesn't support defunding the police either. Before the event, the president met privately for at least an hour with several black families whose loved ones were killed by police, including Botham Jean and Ahmaud Arbery, who was shot to death after being chased down by a retired officer. But when it came time to sign the executive order, the president was surrounded by 9 law enforcement officials, only one of them black. The order makes no mention whatsoever of racism in policing. In his remarks, the president insisted that the problem of misconduct is limited to a very small number of police officers.
I use the word tiny. It's a very small percentage, but you have them.
The executive order encourages local police departments to follow higher standards on use of force and de-escalation, and to report instances of police misconduct to a national registry. The president also suggested his order bans chokeholds.
As part of this new credentialing process, chokeholds will be banned, except if an officer's life is at risk.
But the order does not require police to stop using chokeholds. Lee Merritt, who represents some of the families who met with the president today, says it's not enough.
Well, the executive order takes incremental steps, and we need radical change.
The news on police reform today. Let's get right to John Karl, because, John, I know there's another breaking headline as we're on the air tonight. Just a short time ago, the Department of Justice filing a civil lawsuit to try to stop the publication of President Trump's former National Security Advisor John Bolton's new memoir. That book set to be out next week.
David, this lawsuit from the administration says that Bolton's book is, quote, rife with classified information, and that if it is published, it will damage American national security. Bolton's lawyer dismisses that, saying there is no classified information in the book. There's only information that is embarrassing to the president. It is unclear when this will be resolved, but this could very quickly go all the way to the Supreme Court. And of course, Bolton's book is due to be published a week from today.
A week from today, John, thank you. We should mention that our Martha Raddatz landed the first interview with John Bolton about his memoir.
Surrounding himself with police officers today as he signed an executive order suggesting new standards for law enforcement.
These standards will be as high and as strong as there is on earth.
Mr. Trump's executive order creates a database to track officers with excessive force complaints, suggests banning chokeholds in most cases, and calls on departments to deploy social workers when responding to the homeless and mentally ill. But the order is merely a list of recommendations, not legal restrictions, and the president used his speech today less as a conversation about racial bias in policing and more as a rally supporting officers.
Without police, there is chaos. Without law, there is anarchy. And without safety, there is catastrophe.
Democrats say the president's action is not enough and want a ban on all chokeholds and to make it easier to sue police for misconduct.
There's nothing about what the president announced today that would hold police officers who break the rules and break the law accountable.
Before signing the order, President Trump met with the families of Botham Jean, Tatiana Jefferson, and others impacted by police violence, as well as the mother of Ahmaud Arbery, the 25-year-old black man killed in Georgia while jogging. 3 white men are charged with his murder. Wanda Cooper Jones is Arbery's mother.
I think the president was very receiving. She was very compassionate. He did assure each family member that we would and should expect change.
Meanwhile, tonight, a new twist in the president's rift with his former national security advisor, John Bolton. The Justice Department is suing him to block publication of his tell-all book scheduled to be released next.
Deciding on criminal charges, came out and said that tasers were deadly here, when Atlanta police were seen on live television using them on 2 students during a night of violent protests. 6 officers were charged.
As many of you all know, under Georgia law, a taser is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law.
Police across the city argue that if a police stun gun was deadly then it should equally be considered deadly here, justifying this shooting. Atlanta fire officials tonight are stepping up their search for alleged arsonists who burned the Wendy's restaurant down. There were multiple suspects, and they say this woman is one of them.
We're outside that burned-down Wendy's where the peaceful protest continues. The Fulton County District Attorney could deliver charges on this case as soon as tomorrow. The possible charges include aggravated assault, murder, felony murder, or possibly no charges at all. David?
And you'll stay on it. We'll see you tomorrow night, Steve. Now to the coronavirus, the very real concern here in the U.S., and tonight perhaps the most promising treatment for the virus yet. The UK's Oxford University now reporting a low-cost common steroid readily available here in the U.S. too that has cut the death rate in some of the most severe cases by a third. Here's ABC's Maggie Rulli tonight.
Tonight, a major potential breakthrough in the fight against coronavirus. The first drug that improves survival rates in the sickest COVID-19 patients.
It's a really important first step. It shows what can be done, and it's shown it with a treatment that can be used immediately.
Dr. Martin Landrick and his team at the University of Oxford discovered that dexamethasone, a common steroid, was shown to cut the risk of death by a third for patients who were on ventilators and reduce deaths by 20% for those who were on oxygen.
When somebody comes off a ventilator, do they come off the ventilator dead or alive? And we've improved their chances of coming off that ventilator alive.
The Oxford team worked in near record time, setting up what's believed to be the world's biggest trial of existing treatments in just weeks. Today's results are so encouraging, British doctors announced they'll begin treating patients with the drug today.
It's really important because the drug itself is very widely available. It's on almost every pharmacy shelf in every hospital. It's available throughout the world, and it's extremely cheap.
In fact, dexamethasone can be used to treat a patient in the U.S. for just $1 a day. For Scott Krakauer in New York, he says the drug was a turning point in his fight against COVID-19.
I was coughing around the clock.
He was in the ER and says he was having trouble breathing. But within hours of taking the drug, he says he began to feel better almost immediately.
This was like a big difference, a huge difference after I went on the IV. steroid that I felt.
Dexamethasone's a steroid that reduces inflammation and appears to ease the virus's effects on lungs. It's different from another virus treatment, remdesivir, which speeds up recovery time, but hasn't yet shown benefit in improving survival rates.
The news on that steroid, very promising, Maggie, with us. And there's also a new study tonight, Maggie, that just came out about how quickly the virus can spread, particularly among those under 40.
Yeah, David, exactly. This is an alarming new study out of Japan that shows people ages 20 to 39, even those without symptoms, may be the ones who are driving the spread of this virus outside of hospitals. The study documents multiple cases where just one young person was able to trigger an infection cluster that infected 5 or more people in places like restaurants, bars, and gyms. David?
Amid that news, Maggie, sharp words here in the U.S. for young Americans tonight. U.S. authorities not liking what they're seeing.
In recent days, the media has taken to sounding the alarm bells over a second wave of coronavirus infection. Such panic is overblown. Now, the message from the White House, from a lot of officials, from the president on down, Abby, as you know, they want to suggest that this crisis is really over.
Yeah, and it's really contrary to what the experts and not the media, really the people's worried about a second wave, or rather worried that this current wave is not fully over, are the health experts. These are the people who study this and who look at the data, and they're seeing a clear trend towards certain places that are opening very quickly where cases are going up. And, you know, here in Tulsa, we've been on the ground for a few days now. It has been remarkable to see just how little mask wearing there is here, even as the state reopens. There are all kinds of different levels of which certain restaurants and establishments are requiring face masks or are allowing people to eat indoors. So there is so much what seems to be confusion about what people ought to be doing that it's really just an example of how this is happening all over the country. Here in Oklahoma,
the aerosols become airborne and potentially infectious for hours.
Kimberly Prather has spent her career studying aerosols.
If it gets into the aerosols and it fills a room and everybody breathes that air, that just opens up the number of people who can be infected.
Aerosols, as shown here, could help explain events like a choir practice in Washington State in March, where one person likely infected 52 others.
We're not recognizing the potential for airborne.
Joe Allen is director of Harvard's Healthy Buildings program.
Opening up the windows is easy and cheap, but what about actually changing the ventilation system of a big building?
I'm not saying people have to go out and revamp their entire mechanical system. Bring in a bit more outdoor air, which most building systems can do. And if you're recirculating air, you need to improve or put in a higher efficiency filters. In fact, every building can be a healthy building. It doesn't cost that much to get us there.
New research suggests sunlight can deactivate the virus in aerosols, and wearing a mask provides another crucial layer of protection against the airborne spread of the virus. Nora?
Dr. John LaPook, thank you. Tensions are high after North Korea demolished a building used to host talks with mastery.
Check balances.
Freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly...
Criminal statute. It's a civil liability, and these days nearly every single officer who's found liable under that does get indemnification everywhere in the country. Are you saying that that is wrong?
Protected under civil liability if they were in fact wrong in the actions that they committed.
And Chief Acevedo, let me ask you about Texas. First, could you let me know whether you think there should be indemnification for police officers if they are found civilly liable in a Section 1983 case? And second, I've heard that under Texas law, there's a rule that actually prevents indemnification if somebody's found to have committed a constitutional violation.
Yeah, Senator, my recollection of the Texas law is if in fact
and officers outside of the scope of their employment that actually have acted in an egregious, willful manner in violation of the constitutional law, that there is a provision, but again, I'm not a lawyer, that prohibits or precludes indemnification by the state. Or
gotcha. And outside the scope of employment is a traditional employment law doctrine that covers essentially every employer and every employee in the United States, correct?
I would assume that, and if you commit a crime, we're soldiers of the law. We're here to enforce the law, not violate the law. So that would be one of the instances in which this may apply.
And President Yo's
co-workers. That's how I am.
And here's a couple of great gift ideas that do something special for him. Cup phone with removable cups. Fits virtually any.
Don't go back to sleep. Just go over there.
Mr. Brooks does. He pulls into a parking spot and one of the responding officers begins questioning him.
Just walk back here. Do you have any weapons on you or anything like that?
I don't have anything on me.
Well, having determined he's unarmed, they perform a series of sobriety tests and administer a breathalyzer, which comes back, they say, over the limit. Now, at this point, as you'll see in the next clip, the officers decide to handcuff him. Mr. Brooks resists, a scuffle breaks out, the officers try to use a taser on him. The body cam video is incomplete because both officers' cameras somehow ended up on the ground. However, you'll hear profanity, apparently a taser used, and then the fatal shots.
Put your hands on your butt. Hey, stop fighting! Stop fighting! Stop fighting! You're gonna get tased! You're gonna get tased! Mr. Ross! Stop! Come on, man! Stop! You're gonna get tased! Mr. Ross! There's a sitting home! Hands off the taser! Stop fighting! Hands off the taser! Stop fighting! 63.
The sound of gunshots, 2 hitting Mr. Brooks in his back and buttocks, according to the medical examiner. A police dash cam actually shows the scuffle. You can see the officer wrestling with Mr. Brooks. You see one of the officers pull out a taser and see the struggle over it, after which Mr. Brooks gets a hold of it and points it back at the officers to no apparent effect. It's at this point that one of the officers pulls his taser and fires at Mr. Brooks, who's running away. Now, a restaurant surveillance camera picks up the rest of it, and we've slowed it down very slightly. You see Mr. Brooks being pursued by one of the officers, turning back with the taser at him. The actual shooting happens off camera, but was captured on video from a restaurant surveillance camera at a drive-thru. From that angle, you can see, moving from left to right, Mr. Brooks being pursued by one of the officers, turning, apparently pointing the taser back at him, and finally the officer appearing to open fire. Now, we should mention right here that police do not consider a taser a deadly weapon. At least that's what they say when they use it themselves. In addition, the officers had already determined Mr. Brooks had no firearms on him. As CNN law enforcement analyst and former Philadelphia Police Chief Charles Ramsey put it, the officers had his car, they knew who he was, and where to find him. Rayshard Brooks was 27 years old. In addition to his widow, he leaves behind 3 young daughters and a teenage stepson. The medical examiner has ruled his killing a homicide. Today Atlanta's mayor called it murder. Garrett Rolfe, the officer who did the shooting, has been fired. His partner has been put on administrative leave. Charges may come as early as Wednesday. Atlanta's police chief has stepped down.
We saw the worst happen on Friday night with Mr. Brooks. It angered me and it saddened me beyond words. But I know that it is my responsibility as mayor of this great city for us to continue to work to put that anger and that sadness into action.
Joining us now is Paul Howard, Jr., District Attorney of Fulton County, Georgia. District Attorney Howard, thanks for being with us. You've said that a decision on possible charges against the officer who shot Rayshard Brooks would be made sometime around Wednesday. Can you just go through which charges may be under consideration?
There are three major charges that we are considering. The first charge being murder, which addresses an intent to kill. The second charge, felony murder, which occurs when death arises out of an underlying felony, and in this case, the underlying felony would be a aggravated assault. And the third charge that we're considering is voluntary manslaughter, which is a death in a heat of passion.
And I want to play something that Mr. Brooks's widow told CBS about the officers. Let's play that.
I want them to go to jail. I want them to deal with the same thing as if it was my husband who killed someone else. If it was my husband who shot them, he would be in jail. He would be doing a life sentence. They need to be put away. I feel like even though everything happened so fast, it didn't take nothing but a split second for the other officer to say, hey, calm down. He could have told his partner, calm down. So all of them need to be sentenced the same way.
She's saying the second officer involved, who didn't fire his weapon, should be sentenced the same way. I'm wondering what you make of that. Because right now he's on administrative leave, I believe, or administrative duty.
Well, we are considering both of the officers. We're not just considering one of the officers, and so the charges that we are exploring are charges that could possibly be lodged against both of the officers involved. I think one of the things that I hear Mrs. Miller addressing is what people from the community continue to say, is they want one system of justice. And she's right. If this had been a civilian, there's a possibility that charges would have been lodged against them already. And I think what people around the country are saying is we want one system so that both the police and citizens are treated equally. And that's what we're hoping to do by making our decision on Wednesday.
Father or a brother, and you go watch the pain in even his cousin's face today, in tears at the loss.
Here's the thing, Chris. We've had this conversation before. You have represented other families. In fact, you're representing George Floyd's daughter. At some juncture, the strange part about the last 3 weeks is you would think that you would see police on their best behavior in America, and yet we have not seen that with the protests. We have not seen that with the rubber bullets. We've not seen that with the tear gas. We've not seen that with the batons and the arrests. But you would think that these two cops in Atlanta know what's going on in this country. At what point is this not about policy but about culture?
That's exactly right, Ali. Policy changes are great. And a lot of cities are trying to do that right now, but it's the mentality of policing that has to change right now. It's the sense of respect and empathy and caring about the community that you're policing that we have to get back to. And I know that it's possible. I know there are some officers out there that truly care. We just have to, that has to be highlighted and not the aggression.
Chris Stewart, I don't even know how to ask you this question. What does success look like to you in these cases? In the case of Rayshard Brooks and in the other cases, the case of George Floyd and the other ones you've represented, because there is justice to be had somewhere, one thinks, but these lives don't come back. And until we stop cheapening the lives of African American people of color in this country, what does success look like to you?
That's the big question. I mean, I used to think that I could define it. It was winning the case, the civil case for the family, or getting an officer that murdered somebody arrested, or getting one policy change or something like that. But, you know, the only justice that I really see or believe in now is a full systematic change where unity is created between policing and the community, where positive policing and the positive police officers are highlighted and that culture takes over, where the interaction is, hey man, take an Uber home or walk home and not let me throw these cuffs on you even though you're not even driving.
Do you think that the reaction that you've seen in your city from your mayor and from the police chief, I actually had some people say they're sorry to see that police chief gone because she was reform-minded.
I worked with Chief Shields a lot before and had positive experiences with her. And I still haven't gotten clarity on her stepping down. I have respect for Chief Shields. I think that our mayor is doing what she can. It's hard to get change. You have to take on the unions. You have to take on officers that don't want change. This with the civil rights movement, people fought change. So, I salute the mayors and the governors and people that are pushing change and policy reform. But it's really about the people out there in the community, white, black, coming together to try and just fix this so we can have a better society.
57, President Dwight Eisenhower federalized the National Guard of Arkansas. He sent troops to Little Rock to force Governor Orville Faubus to obey the law. So the question is, where is our Justice Department today, right now? Is there a reason the DOJ hasn't filed federal conspiracy charges against the people who organized and led these riots? It's not as if we don't know who they are. Their crimes are on YouTube. You know the reason. Black Lives Matter was involved. It is politically sensitive. No prosecutor wants to be called a racist, as if it's racist to punish people for crimes they committed. You wonder what the victims of those crimes think. The old people who were beaten to the ground for trying to defend their property. The shop owners whose life savings were stolen or burned. The families of the people who were murdered during the riots, and there were quite a few of them. No one is defending these people. No one is punishing their attackers. Nobody cares. Imagine how they feel about that. What recourse do they have? Do they have to torch a Wendy's or loot a Walmart to get our attention? Let's hope not. It might be enough to have a single national leader, just one, who understands what is actually going on in this country and is brave enough to say so. That might make all the difference, and it would certainly make the political career of the person who does it. In the fall of 1968, a teaching assistant at San Francisco State University called George Murray gave a speech endorsing racial violence. Murray urged black students to bring guns to campus and, quote, kill all the slave masters. Murray, by the way, was the, quote, Minister of Education in the local Black Panther Party, which was the Antifa of its time. When administrators learned about Murray's speech, they equivocated, but ultimately they suspended him under pressure. In response to this, a group called the Third World Liberation Front shut down the campus. Sound familiar? They demanded the university drop all admission standards for black applicants and admit students purely on the basis of race. Administrators were paralyzed in the face of this. More than anything, they didn't want to be called racist. The university's president was so terrorized by it that he quit and left. Ultimately, the leadership of San Francisco State fell to an unlikely president, a Japanese-Canadian academic called S.I. Hayakawa. Hayakawa was short, eccentric, wore thick glasses, but he was completely fearless. On December 2nd, 1968, Hayakawa marched into the middle of a student protest. Rioters immediately assaulted him, but Hayakawa kept going. He climbed onto the roof of a sound truck and ripped the wires out of the loudspeaker. San Francisco State University reopened that day. So here's the lesson for today's office holders. S.I. Hayakawa became a folk hero for standing up to the mob. He was elected to the United States Senate from California. Republicans supported him. Voters did too. They didn't always understand him. Hayakawa wore a Scottish tam o' shanter cap in public and never really explained why he did. But it didn't matter. He was brave and honest, and voters appreciated that above all. They always do. We don't have our Hayakawa yet. Instead, we have cowards. Our leaders are happy to talk about everything but the collapse of the centuries-old civilization tumbling down around them. They have no idea how little credibility they have. They have no sense of how irrelevant they have become. If you can't tell the truth when the truth actually matters, then nothing you say matters. Meanwhile, Black Lives Matter becomes more powerful and more popular with the public. Why is that happening? Exactly. Here's why. Because Black Lives Matter is getting exactly what they want. And that is the most basic sign of strength. Strength is the most appealing quality to voters and to people and to animals. 3 weeks ago, Black Lives Matter demanded that cities defund their police. Today, the mighty NYPD, the biggest police department in our nation, the most sophisticated police department in the world, bowed and announced it is abolishing its entire plainclothes division, 600 people, gone for good, because Black Lives Matter wanted it done. And now it is done. That's not bluffing. It's not posturing. It's not tweeting. That is real power. You'll notice it did not require the usual maneuvering for Black Lives Matter to get that power. They didn't need a team of lawyers to get it. Black Lives Matter doesn't make legal arguments. They're not trying to convince you of anything. Black Lives Matter believes in force. They flood the streets with angry young people who break things, and they hurt anyone who gets in the way. When they want something, they take it. Make them mad, and they will set your business on fire. Annoy them, and they will occupy your downtown and declare a brand new country. You're not going to do anything about it. They know that for certain. This is the most destructive kind of politics. We've seen a lot of it in recent years. Organized groups did it to Brett Kavanaugh. The main point of slandering Kavanaugh was never to block his confirmation. We misread that. They knew they probably couldn't achieve it. The real point was to send Kavanaugh and John Roberts and the other Republican justices a very clear message. Step out of line and we will hurt your families. And judging from recent court decisions, it worked. At times it's very clear that supposedly conservative justices are afraid to defy the mob. So what message do the rest of us take from what's happened over the past 3 weeks? It's very simple. The message is force is more effective than voting. Elections change nothing. Rioting, by contrast, makes you rich and powerful. When you riot, prosecutors will ignore the law on your behalf. Corporations will send you millions. Politicians will kneel down before you. It works. Violence works. That's the message. Everyone hears that message. Until violence stops working, violence will continue.
I appreciate it. Thanks very much. Coming up next, the president's new answer to the coronavirus pandemic. Apparently, it's just stopped testing, even as a new forecast predicts more than 200,000 fatalities by October in this country. Keeping them honest next. And later, the police chief, who knelt with protesters, will join us after members of her...
Do you think he's dog whistling, or do you think he's just pulling out a straight-on bullhorn to send a message, a white supremacist message, to some of his followers?
Well, it's very hard for me not to see that as a bullhorn. I mean, it just is, because I do know in the beginning maybe they didn't understand the significance of June 19th, but it was quickly pointed out, and they were going to continue. It wasn't until there was tremendous pushback that they decided, to change the date.
All right, before I forget, I want to bring up something that we're reporting in the Washington Post today about what happened in Lafayette Square when the president pushed back, or had protesters pushed back from Lafayette Square so he could go to St. John's for that photo op. The Post is reporting more of the details of planning and the execution, and law enforcement personnel from the Secret Service, Park Police, National Guard. We're now learning there were guards from a U.S. penitentiary in Hazleton, West Virginia, who were there. Is Congress going to investigate?
Yes.
Investigate this? And could you talk about why it's troubling that federal penitentiary officers were involved in what happened in Lafayette Square?
Well, first of all, Congress is going to investigate. That's not a committee that I serve on, but it will be the Oversight Committee, and I know that they are planning a hearing about it. You know, what I think was actually even worse was the fact that people did not know who those folks were. I mean, there were a lot of law enforcement officers there who had no identification whatsoever. You didn't know if they were law enforcement or if they were a rogue militia. So that is a very, very scary thing. So why they would bring them in, I have no idea. They had the National Guard. I don't know why they needed to bring anyone else in. So that's very frightening.
One of the other things to whip us back to Tulsa, but to talk about coronavirus, one of the things that we also know is that Tulsa officials have been pleading, please don't come here with this rally. Is the United States opening up? Are states opening up too soon? And is that certainly putting the American population at risk? But talk about what this means for African Americans who have borne the brunt of this pandemic.
Let me just say, Jonathan, what I really think is going on is that I think that the administration is not being public about this, but I think they're adopting a herd immunity standard. And herd immunity means just let everybody get exposed. What we used to do years ago with chicken pox. you know, when you had a child, you would intentionally expose them so they could go ahead and just get the virus. And I think that that is the policy that the administration has adopted. And with herd immunity, that is very, very frightening because they're not actually saying that. We know that the death rate has been extremely disproportionate amongst African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, and Pacific Islanders, depending on where you are. And so you have heard the president on several occasions say, well, you know, the people that are getting sick are people who are older, people who have a lot of other health conditions. It is shocking and so tragic to me that he doesn't seem to be able to muster any empathy at losing over 100,000 Americans are dead in the last 3 months. I mean, you kind of have to say that a couple of times to let that register.
And with a new report out of Harvard predicting that we could have another 100,000 dead by the end of the summer. You know, emails revealed in a lawsuit last week include emails showing the politicization of the CDC responses after the president was upset when their top doctors were saying the coronavirus will spread in February. But what can you in Congress do to assure the American people that the health information from the CDC is not tainted?
Well, not only not tainted, we're trying to get the health information. One of the things that we passed when we passed the CARES Act, you know, from the Congressional Black Caucus perspective, we've been very concerned about this disproportionate death rate and believe that there needs to be a specific intervention in communities where there is the disproportionate death rate. The problem is, where do you intervene if you don't have the data to know where the intervention is needed? And so we did pass legislation that required the CDC to come forward with some of the demographic information within 21 days. And the head of the CDC had to publicly apologize for the report that they submitted because it basically had no information.
Congresswoman, how damaging would it be if the United States had to lock down, have everyone stay at home and shut down the economy again?
Well, it would be very damaging, very devastating. But, you know, again, over 100,000 people we have lost. We need to do something extreme. And here you have the United States, the most developed, richest country in the world, and we never got a handle on this in the beginning, which is why it's so bad now. You know, one of the things that happened in the Obama administration was we faced a potential pandemic then with Ebola. What did Obama do? He mobilized the entire world, and Ebola didn't even spread in Africa. It settled in 3 countries. The World Health Organization predicted 1 million people would die. 11,000 people died. I was on the phone last week with the ambassador to India. India, 1.6 billion people. They've had 6,000 people die. And so there is no reason, except for the fact that this pandemic was handled inappropriately from the very beginning. It ballooned, and we've never been able to get back control over it.
Congresswoman, I can't. We're running out of time, but I can't let you go without talking.
Chloroquine with azithromycin is a good combination. What am I missing here?
Just the data to show that it's actually good. So the FDA approved hydroxychloroquine under tremendous political pressure for an emergency use authorization. That does not require any proof that the medication actually works. It just has to be a reasonable belief that it may be of some benefit. And there was no reasonable belief. There was a lot of political pressure. There were a few studies that suggested it might be, and lots of people experimenting with it. But we've now had a number of studies that have shown it's not beneficial, may be harmful, in the sense that patients with COVID don't do better. The FDA has recorded at least 25 deaths from cardiac arrhythmias with COVID-associated use of hydroxychloroquine. And BARDA asked them to pull the emergency use authorization, which is what they just did, basically saying no evidence it's beneficial, some evidence that it really is harmful, and we should not be using it, and certainly no real evidence that it's you should take it for prophylaxis, that is, to prevent yourself from getting COVID.
What's missing is any real conception of what testing is truly for, of the early warning it can give, of the deaths it can prevent. By the president's formulation, testing is either something to boast about or make him look bad. And it's not just testing, it's suspension of disbelief that the virus is still a grave danger. So much so that he is insisting on holding a massive rally indoors in Tulsa on Saturday. And today, when asked, Vice President Pence talked about why the idea of cramming 19,000 people, many of them older, from all parts of the country, into a crowded arena for hours on end was actually a good idea.
Oklahoma has really been in the forefront of our efforts to slow the spread, and in a very real sense, they flattened the curve. And today, their hospital capacity is abundant.
Now, keeping them honest, that is simply not true. What's fascinating about Vice President Pence is his whole job is to sound folksy and stable and broad-shouldered and make it sound like there's a rational person who's actually listening to what the president is saying and agrees with it and is communicating exactly what the president is saying. Here's the daily case rate for Oklahoma over the last 2 weeks. The line represents a 5-day moving average, and as you can see, that line is up at the end of those 14 days. It's not down. And over the weekend, Tulsa's top public health official had this piece of advice concerning the rally. Quote, "If you want to stay safe, don't go." More now on the public health and political aspects of what the president said today. Joining us, CNN Chip Acosta at the White House and CNN Chief Medical Correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Jim, what the president is saying about testing is, I mean, it is ludicrous if it wasn't actually also kind of dangerous given the fact that, you know, there needs to be as much testing as possible in order for get people to go back to work. Has there been any reaction from the task force, or are they still in the witness protection program?
Anderson, I
they're
talked to a
disappeared.
source.
I mean, like they're only now occasionally here or there. I don't know. You know, I haven't seen Dr. Birx on TV. You know, I don't know where they are. Are they allowed out?
Yeah. Well, despite all that, Anderson, I did manage to get in touch with a source close to this task force earlier this evening who had one word for what the president had to say earlier today, and it was, quote, "Yikes." Anderson, and that is a direct quote. Anderson, this is a president who hates metrics that can be used by people to hold him accountable, whether it's where the stock market is, where the unemployment rate is, or where the number of cases is from the coronavirus. But Anderson, make no mistake, this is an extension of not just what the president has been saying, but other top White House officials in recent days. That the reason why we're seeing an uptick in cases from the coronavirus is because we're doing more testing. And I talked to an administration official who is close to this task force who said that is simply not the case. That yes, in some cases, sure, there are more cases because they're doing more testing, but also because there has been a spike in infections in certain parts of the country, and there's just no denying that unless you're the president.
Sanjay, I mean, against the backdrop of the new University of Washington model, you have the president's upcoming rally in Tulsa. Now, the venue apparently holds 19,000 people. It's indoors. Is that an event, I mean, beyond the political reason for it, I mean, just would you go to any event that had 19,000 people inside?
It's the worst case scenario, Anderson. And, you know, I think most people sort of realize that by this point. There's a contagious virus out there. It's still out there. We've forgotten about it maybe, but it hasn't forgotten about us. We'll put up the risk factors for various things. We know that the least risky way if you're going to have a gathering of some sort is to do it virtually. But the most risky sort of thing is to do a large indoor event where people are coming from all different locations. You can't practice social distancing. They want to fill it to the rim. They're going to give out masks but not mandate that you wear them. You have many common public areas. There will be infections that come from this. If there's a super spreader event, a lot of people could get infected. They then take those infections back to their communities. And as you pointed out, Anderson, many of these folks are older, maybe vulnerable. There's real risks here. This is the exact opposite thing of what we should be doing. And one thing just about the testing, Anderson, because you and I have been talking about this for, what, 5 months now? I cannot believe that in June now that the idea that we should pull back on testing has become a thing, even. It is, the exact wrong direction that we should be going in. In 24 hours, 600 people died. There are more people who died in this country in the last 24 hours than entire countries through this whole pandemic. We don't even know what we don't know anymore with regard to testing in this country. It really, really worries me as we go forward into the rest of this year.
And sometimes, I mean, there's been obviously a lot of concern about a second wave. Apparently, we're still in the first wave, and correct me if I'm wrong about this. Dr. Fauci has said any type of real normality might not return until next year. And yet you see images of people really pushing things out in parks, no masks, no social distancing. Obviously, look, even at the outdoor rallies, you have people in very close quarters. Yes, you're outside, you're on the move, people are wearing masks. But, I mean, how badly could all of... I mean, there is a real kind of sense of people are just had it, or just too tired with it, or, you know, feel that whether it's the political rally for Trump or rallies out in the street, that it's more important to voice your opinion and stand up and be counted at a time like this. But how badly could all this backfire? I mean,
it could. Yeah. When you look at those IMHE models, again, which we've followed, you know, since the beginning, Anderson, you remember that they said initially, at one point they said 30, 40, 50,000 people by August 4th, they kept saying, right? So here we are beginning of June, and what is it, 120,000 roughly now people have died? So more than double the people have died than the projection thought would die by August 4th. Now they're saying 200,000 people may die by October 1st. Sadly, and I get no joy whatsoever in saying this, but I think those models are vastly under projecting at this point. I mean, you know, when we decided to stay at home, put those stay-at-home orders in place, you know, there were fewer than 80 people who had died in this country, between 4,000 and 5,000 people who had been infected. That's when we decided to go into the stay-at-home mode. Now we're reopening, and there's 110,000, 120,000 people who have died, and 2 million people who become infected. It makes no sense, right? It makes no sense. And if people aren't abiding by the basic principles of mask wearing and doing things that we know can have an impact, everyone is going to be worried. I get that.
Yeah. And the reason I mean, let's remember, the reason we're not hearing from the Coronavirus Task Force every day and the President every day and Mike Pence every day on coronavirus is because the President, the last time they actually had a briefing, the President so embarrassed himself by suggesting people get experimented on with by injecting disinfectant into them that they stopped the Coronavirus Task Force briefings because the President embarrassed himself and got mad that he was called out on it and called out on his lies about it. Sanjay Gupta, Jim Acosta, thank you very much. Up next, the police chief.
Also about mentioning that I'm an African-American man several times on the call with the expectation that that would bring the cops whistling down on my head with special vengeance. So, yes, it was more sinister, potentially with more deadly consequences. I don't like to speculate as to whether or not that was more deadly consequences were going to happen. But what's really revelatory is that she went there, that in that moment, when she was looking to get an edge in our confrontation, she decided to go to that dark racial place. And it's interesting in this example that we just saw from San Francisco, I love how that guy handled it, because he did exactly everything I think you're supposed to do. He did not ramp them any power over him. He did not feel obliged to answer any of their questions. He just continued to do what he knew he was entitled to do and let them go off and do what they thought they needed to do. And they're suffering the consequences for that.
But it could go the other way. That's the danger, right? He said something interesting. I had somebody tweet me and say, why didn't you just tell him that that was his place? Tell me why you don't, why people of color don't have to do that. They don't have to answer those questions about whether this is my place or not.
Because for the same reason that I didn't stop reporting the scofflaw behavior I was capturing on my iPhone when that woman threatened to call the police on me and told an African-American man was threatening her life. Because you don't participate in your own dehumanization. You don't give them the power to determine your actions when you're not doing anything wrong, to alter your behavior, to comply to their wishes, to give in to their desire to be satisfied, to be comforted, to have their unwarranted fears placated by you justifying your existence. You just don't do it. It's against any principle of human dignity.
Tremaine Lee, you actually documented these things. You've talked about these things. Some people call them microaggressions, but microaggressions is a difficult term because it seems micro, it seems small. The consequence of these things, including what happened to Mr. Cooper, could be very consequential. He says he doesn't want to speculate, but we see enough evidence that when somebody calls and says there's an African-American man who's threatening my life, that could be dangerous.
These everyday forms of racism or microaggression, they happen so routinely that they almost seem benign, but they are anything but. When you call for an armed response for people sitting in a Starbucks or sleeping in your dorm room or renting an Airbnb or bird watching in Central Park, you are immediately putting that man's life in danger. And any interaction with police and black folks, especially given how we've been criminalized over time, we've seen these outcomes. And we also like to give cute names. We call them Karen, or you'll find some way to kind of poke fun at it. But this is really dangerous, and we've seen it time and again. Let's think about John Crawford just a few years ago in a Walmart who picked up a toy gun off the shelf, and within seconds, police arrived and shoot him dead because he was being targeted and followed by customers inside because of fear of some shoplifting or what. Again, his own flesh was criminalized. So it happens so often, we think it's nothing, but these are part of a bigger spoke that once they get rolling, we've seen some very, very dangerous outcomes.
Mr. Cooper, I'm sorry to talk about you in the third person while Tremaine's here. I know that that's not, you're here and you can answer for yourself. The woman who did this to you has apologized. The woman who did this to the gentleman in San Francisco has apologized. Both of them have suffered consequences, as have their, in the case of the woman in San Francisco, her husband was fired from his job as well. What is supposed to happen? Do you think that there's a lesson to be learned by everybody who sees these videos that I'm full of these little racist sentiments? Because I think people are uncomfortable with the idea that they might actually be racists.
Well, we all make assumptions. That's human nature. We look at people and we judge based on how they present themselves, their hair, their clothes, all sorts of manner of presentation. We make snap judgments about people. That's human nature. That's not going to change. The problem with it is that people in these cases are not just making snap judgments based on clothes or hair, but also on skin color. That becomes another factor. And the other problem is that when these snap judgments are made, too often they lead to dire consequences like the death of George Floyd or the death, particularly of Ahmaud Arbery, who was the young man who went jogging in Georgia and was chased down by two white guys in a white van simply for going jogging because they made an assumption based on his skin color that he was up to the foot, and he ended up dead. And they self-defense and almost got away with it. So I guess the point is we all make assumptions, but you've got to check yourself. If you're going to make an assumption before you make that stupid, boneheaded comment, before you insert yourself into the situation, check yourself and why am I doing this? Why am I making this? Is race really a factor here? And 9 times out of 10, I think you might find, unfortunately, yes.
Were you surprised that the woman with whom you had that interaction actually made it about race? You might have assumed that that was where she was going or where her assumptions were coming from. But the idea that she actually said, I'm going to call, I mean, she must have seen that you were videotaping. You were taping this on your phone. She said, I'm going to call and say there's an African-American man who's threatening my life. And then she did that. I mean, it's beyond belief that it actually happened.
Yeah, it was. Well, that's why I put it up on my Facebook page, because I'm like, this one's a doozy. Because I had no idea it was going to take a racial turn until she did that. And she even goes so far as to telegraph it and say, oh, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm like, okay. And then she pulls down her mask, so for easy identification purposes. And then just to get Peter riled up, she starts twirling the dog by the collar. It was a perfect storm of, what are you doing? So, yeah, like I said, check your go.
What a remarkable development. And in a normal world, we'd have talked earlier than now, but so much has happened in this time that we couldn't. Tremaine, I think I've heard a lot in the last 3 weeks of a lot of African Americans saying to white people who are curious about how they can change the way they do things, how do I learn about this? And African Americans saying, that's not really our job to teach you. But what can white people who don't think they're racist, but in both of these instances did something that, let's not sugarcoat it, were racist? What can they do to unlearn that behavior or to not do it?
I mean, first and foremost, you got to drop the ego, drop the privilege. I've talked to experts who engage with anti-racist work who always say, we've heard a lot recently, it's not enough to not be a racist. You have to be an anti-racist. You have to attack your value system and your beliefs, especially when it comes to those kind of hardwired racist beliefs that are so much a part of American life. But you have to listen and be open. And also, it's a thing called Google. You know, you can like just punch a few things in the search bar and you'll get a lot, right? Go to a library. But you have to recognize a thing for what it is at first. It may not be racism in the sense you're trying to use racial epithets or burning crosses in yards, but the everyday slights, the everyday little pokes and pokes that white folks can give to black folks, and we have to weather it, right? It's not just physically dangerous, but the stress and trauma of having to navigate all these racist little potholes, racist snakes along the way, it takes a toll on our mental, physical, and spiritual health. So white folks, just go out, read a book, talk to a neighbor. You'll learn a few things.
Yeah. Mr. Cooper, I'm glad you're here to have this conversation with us, and I thank you for the way in which you handled this situation. Christian Cooper, Tremaine Lee's latest episode of his podcast, Into America, dropped today. It's about the killing of Rayshard Brooks. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. That's all in for this evening. The Rachel Maddow Show begins.
To remove a car from their drive-through lane. Police come, find an apparently intoxicated Mr. Brooks. Half an hour of peaceful dialogue ensues. He's talking about his sister and where to go and walking home. This video is moving way too fast, but we're going to take you through it again, don't worry. After they have the dialogue and they allow him to move his car, they then attempt to arrest him. Now, this is where it gets more complicated. Mr. Brooks resists. That cannot be in dispute. The officers don't seem to know how to control him. That is a very key point for me. I'll make it in more detail later about why it matters so much to me in this situation. Because they cannot, two of them, control one inebriated, apparently, Mr. Brooks, they go to the taser. Brooks gets up, takes a swing at one of the officers, grabs the officer's taser, takes off running. I don't see that Mr. Brooks had what some describe as drug-induced super strength that sometimes you'll hear discussed. I see poor technique, and that matters in this analysis. If you can't do your job using minimal force, you wind up using more and more force. Hence, two officers not being able to control in a struggle that anybody who's had any measure of fight training sees, they don't know what they're doing on the ground with this man. They don't. I'm sorry. No disrespect to police. I have high regard for how many of you do the job, men and women. This is not good technique. They then use the taser because they could not control him. He then gets the taser, and then what you see here ensues. He gets away from two officers because they don't know how to restrain him. He takes off. The officer then shoots toward Brooks and hits him. Okay? Now, did he have the taser? Yes. Did he appear to reach behind his shoulder and shoot at the officer as he was running away? Yes. The officer is Garrett Rolfe, R-O-L-F-E. Rolfe is chasing a man who's running away and shoots him twice in the back. Yes, Brooks resisted. Yes, he hit a cop and got their taser and took off and arguably tried to use it. He was also shot multiple times while running away by police who knew who he was and where he lived. And one key point, that what he was pointing at them was not a gun, because they had already searched him and knew he did not have a gun. And yet, this is going to be heartbreak all across the board, and already is. And the question once again looms above us: what is justice? The police chief stepped down Saturday. The officer
to be driving. Put your hands on your back, Floyd.
All right, again, up to this moment where we get to the handcuffing part, both sides polite, professional, cordial. However, Brooks failed the sobriety test. There was no option for the police at that point. He was over the legal limit. Police attempted to, very cordially even, you could say, take him into custody. Up until this moment, From what we thankfully see, everybody, from what I can see, at their best behavior, courteous, polite, etc., by the book. And that's when, at this second, everything goes south. Now, this is a viewer warning. What you're about to see from this point forward, if you have kids in the room, it is extremely graphic. Take a look.
Put your hands on your back, Floyd. Yep, put your hands on your back. Hey, stop fighting! Stop fighting! Stop fighting! You're gonna get tased! You're gonna get tased! Stop! Mr. Wrong! Stop! Stop! You're gonna get tased! Mr. Wrong! Hands up the Hands up the taser! Hands up the taser! Stop fighting!
Now, seemingly, as you can see on that tape, out of nowhere, the moment the police tried to cuff Mr. Brooks, the video shows Rayshard Brooks first resisting arrest, then attacking both police officers. You see the struggle. Both officers, you can see, are hit, and you hear the police on tape clearly saying over and over, stop fighting, we will have to tase you, stop fighting, stop grabbing the taser. And then ultimately, Mr. Brooks grabbed one of the tasers. He stood up. Cops are still on the ground. The video seems clear. As Mr. Brooks is running, he turns around, and in fact, this is what the APD is now saying, and seems to fire that taser in the officer in foot pursuit. That's Officer Rolfe, who was responding. He responded then by shooting Mr. Brooks twice in the back with a handgun. Horrific scene. And what, as you watch this, what's so sad to me about this is up until that very second when they attempted to handcuff him, the exchange was polite, professional, all courtesies on both sides. All of this did not have to happen. Our thoughts and prayers are with everybody involved in this, the Brooks family, everybody involved. Now, you heard what sounded like genuine niceness, respect from Mr. Brooks towards the police and the police towards him. And everybody has to look at this and wish this never happened. This is not at all like the 8 minutes and 46 seconds on tape of a cop with a knee on the neck of George Floyd. But now the actions from these officers on the scene will rightly be scrutinized, most likely, I would guess, by a jury. Now, before we get to the actual law, when I first saw the George Floyd video, our eyes, it was universal in this country. You know, maybe a few keyboard warriors, you know, anonymously tweeting or writing something online in their basement. Conservatives, liberal, nobody disagreed. That tape did not lie to us. And I'm going to be consistent as I've always been on this program. And by consistent, I mean this. We don't rush to judgment. We believe in due process. We believe in the presumption of innocence, and for good reason. We contact sources. We talk to witnesses. We look at video. We gather evidence. We look at the facts on the ground. That's why we were right, for example, in the case of Michael Brown and Officer Darren Wilson. So many others were wrong. So many others rushed to judgment. And that's why we predicted it would be difficult to convict the officers. Similarly, with the murder, remember, Baltimore, Freddie Gray, in the aftermath of that. We're also right about Duke LaCrosse in that case, the UVA case, the Kavanaugh accusations. I learned my best lesson from Richard Jewell when I was a local host in Atlanta, and so many more. According to Georgia state law, this is what the policy is. And this will matter in a court of law. Police may use deadly force to apprehend a suspected felon only when the officer reasonably believes that the suspect possesses a deadly weapon or an object, device, or instrument which, when used offensively against any person, is likely to result in serious bodily injury. We know after the stealing of the taser, Mr. Brooks immediately became a suspected felon. That would be a felony. But is a police taser a deadly weapon or a device? And by the way, could it be used to seriously injure someone if the taser and the electrode wires have already been discharged? Remember, Brooks already shot the taser as he ran away from the officers. Now, Georgia law also permits deadly force from police. This is the law. Quote, when the officer reasonably believes that the suspect poses an immediate threat of physical violence to the officers or others, or when there is probable cause to believe that the suspect has committed a crime involving the infliction or threatened infliction of serious physical harm. But not only did Mr. Brooks initiate the conflict, he also stole the taser, he aimed it at a police officer, shot it, we can see on tape, And we all have all that video evidence. Again, that's why I like video cams on cops and in squad cars. This would have been, at the end of the day, what we call a simple DUI. Nobody wants it, but if you drink, you're a risk to others. Probably in the first offense, if it wasn't first offense, it's a misdemeanor charge. You get books, you get a summons, you get a court date, and usually you call somebody to pick you up and you go home. Assuming a first offense, likely alcohol counseling, worst case, license suspension, and so that, which means it's all sad, tragic, unnecessary. We're going to have full reaction and analysis coming up. All right, but first, joining us now tonight on the ground in Atlanta is our own Steve Harrigan.
I mean, the fact remains that another African-American man, another unarmed African-American man, was killed at the hands of police, this time shot twice in the back. And that is a heartbreaking reality, not just in terms of where we are as a country, but obviously for the family of Mr. Brooks. Today we heard from some of his family members in what was just an absolutely gut-wrenching news conference.
Not only are we hurt, we are angry. When does it stop? We're not only pleading for justice, we're pleading for change. Zone 3, where my uncle was killed, is the same zone we represented and loved all our lives. We stood with the Atlanta Police Department when they were just tearing up our city and said, this doesn't happen here, leave them alone. And here we are 3 weeks later, those same police took something away from our family that we'll never get back. Rayshard Brooks.
There's no justice that can ever make me feel happy about what's been done. I can never get my husband back. I can never get my best friend. I can never tell my daughter, oh, he's coming to take you skating or swimming lessons. So, it's just going to be a long time before I heal. It's going to be a long time before this family heals.
There is nothing anybody can say right now to heal the pain that that family is feeling. But this is a time when political leaders need to at least try to rise to the occasion, right? To try to find justice, not just for that family, but for the entire community that they represent, especially a community that is now in many ways in crisis. In Atlanta, that burden has fallen on Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. In the days after the death of George Floyd, when Atlanta saw huge and growing protests and sometimes violence, Mayor Bottoms emerged as a clarion voice in Atlanta, but also in remarks that resonated around the country, her speaking both as a mayor and as a mother.
Above everything else, I am a mother. I am a mother to 4 black children in America, one of whom is 18 years old. And when I saw the murder of George Floyd, I hurt like a mother would hurt. And on yesterday, when I heard there were rumors about violent protests in Atlanta, I did what a mother would do. I called my son and I said, "Where are you?" I said, "I cannot protect you, and black boys shouldn't be out today. So you're not going to out-concern me and out-care about where we are in America. I wear this each and every day, and I pray over my children each and every day. So what I see happening on the streets of Atlanta is not Atlanta. This is not a protest. This is not in the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr. This is chaos. A protest has purpose. When Dr. King was assassinated, we didn't do this to our city. So if you love this city that has had a legacy of black mayors and black police chiefs, and people who care about this city, where more than 50% of the business owners in Metro Atlanta are minority business owners. If you care about this city, then go home.
It has just been about 2 weeks since Mayor Bottoms made those remarks in Atlanta. And now her city is coming to grips with another tragedy, another crisis, this time involving its own police department. Today, she signed a series of executive orders aimed at pretty dramatically overhauling the way the Atlanta Police Department uses force. That includes amping up the use of de-escalation tactics and having other officers intervene when they see unreasonable force being used by one of their colleagues. She said today, quote, "It is clear we do not have another day, another minute, another hour to waste." Joining us now live is the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottom.
It's 3%. You know, it's about a 6-fold improvement, mitigation in spread. It's not perfect, but it makes a difference. You want to get back to some sort of normalcy. You want to have the freedoms to go out and stuff like that. It probably should involve wearing a mask for the reasons I'm showing you there. The data is becoming clear. So I don't know how to answer your first question. Who says this is okay? My guess is nobody says it's okay.
Well, we know one guy does. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, thank you very much for being a voice of reason and science, as always. Be well. All right, so if you want to talk about the data, the proof is an administration that actively chooses not to see the truth. An administration that fought in court to stop collecting data on how many companies pay people of color. That won't even let investigators look at data to see if banks are making it harder for black people to get loans. And ended the government's participation in a program to collect data on how police interact with black people. So don't play with the data when you don't even want to accrue any data. Arguing with the numbers because the truth doesn't fit a political agenda doesn't work when you try to bully CNN's polling. And it doesn't work when so many are in the streets living the reality that to you only looks like charts and graphs. Over the span of American history, the Trump administration is a rounding error. Playing politics ignores the moment we find ourselves in. One pushing to finally fulfill a promise that for too long has just been words on parchment. Either all women and men are created equal by what we see every day, or they are not. That area of Seattle, full of protesters, largely free of police, appears to have a new name, and the police are taking a new approach to the demonstrators. You've heard from the mayor. Now the chief is here to explain her strategy. Are they in sync? Plus, some breaking news about what the city council just banned. Next.
Legal everywhere for health providers to turn people away from treatment because they don't like trans people. Right? President Trump is like, oh, we got to act to fix that. They can't get coronavirus tests into nursing homes where 45,000 Americans have just been killed in the past 4 months. They can't figure out any kind of infection control protocol in federal prisons where there are tens of thousands of coronavirus infections and they're not even testing the staff. But you know, they're Johnny on the spot when it comes to whipping up a new federal rule change so trans people can affirmatively be discriminated against by health providers. Because, yeah, that was a problem the country needed working on. Not enough discrimination against trans people in healthcare. Who goes into government for this purpose? After rolling out that new "it's okay to discriminate" rule on Friday night for health providers, the Trump administration is apparently now working on a follow-up rule that will make it affirmatively okay for trans people to be discriminated against in housing as well. Because sure, why not? Right? What else does President Trump have to work on that's more important than making trans people's lives harder and making it clearly legal and welcome for anybody in America to discriminate against trans people and hurt them? Got to get working on that. Definitely don't have time to stop people dying from coronavirus with any meaningful federal government action, but we've got to get our discrimination factor up against the trans community.
For example, I've scrolled names, and thousands of them, in the Obama-Biden years. Nobody does anything to fix Chicago and the violence. Nobody fixes, you know, the schools in every inner city in this country. How is it possible the third highest per capita spending on education for kids is in Baltimore, 13 high schools, not one kid proficient in math, not one. There's institutional failure. Now, Joe and Barack, they could have done something after Ferguson, Cambridge, Baltimore, they did nothing. Donald Trump is looking at all this saying, okay, now we're going to have reforms. But on the other hand, if these states will not accept his assistance unless it gets that bad, I don't think the president should be brought in, unless he has to.
Well, you know, we're talking about Chicago. There was a series called Chicagoland, Sean, and there's a principal of a high school called Finger High, and the series showed her literally making maps and distributing the maps to her students so that they would follow the map to avoid being shot by the gangs that surround the school. Now that is a huge, huge problem. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about the 10 people who were shot recently in the weekend in Chicago, 49 shot and killed, 49 people wounded, and St. Louis and Baltimore, cities both run by Democrats, have a murder rate 3 times higher than that of Chicago. They're just smaller, so we pick on Chicago because in absolute numbers they have more, but in terms of per capita shootings, St. Louis and Baltimore 3 times worse than Chicago. Where's Black Lives Matter?
Hey, Leo, let me go back to this other thing, this new tape released by the lawyer for the Floyd family.
Yes.
There's only one of about 5 minutes. I cannot believe this is happening to an American citizen. Listen. Well, I guess we don't have it.
He moved it. Bro, he's not even moving. Get off of his neck, bro. Get off of his neck. Get back on the street. Are you serious? Bro, are you serious? And you gonna keep your thing on your neck? Yeah, I bet you. Bro, I barely touched me like that, dude. I swear I saw both y'all. Bro, you just gonna let him keep his hand on his neck, bro? You're a bitch, bro. Kyle, you gonna let him keep that like that?
It goes on, Leo. It goes on.
You know what, Sean?
It brings tears to my eyes. This can't happen in this country, Leo. Why didn't the guy stop it?
Because this is where the 3%, those riding to the court, that was an outright murder witnessed by the entire world. And that's why you have legitimate anger as a civil rights attorney, total anger. And you have the president who's going to try to do something with an executive order. You know what I fear tomorrow? He comes out with an executive order, and every Democrat, because they're playing politics with this, and you call for national unity, the Democrats don't want unity on this, because everyone agrees that was murder except the Democrats who are trying to win an election.
Larry.
I was going to just say the occasional rare bad cop does a lot of damage, because if you have a good encounter with the cop, you may tell 5 or 10 people. You have a bad encounter with a cop, you tell everybody. So it's really important for good cops to deal with bad cops, and the ones who are hurt most by these bad cops are the good cops, and it's so unfair to them.
Nobody's going to want this job anymore. Nobody's going to want it. Right. At the end of the day. All right.
I agree.
You know.
Station again. How is that law? But it was never the end of the fight. Today, the High Court delivered another win for the LGBTQ community. 6-3 vote. The court ruled Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act doesn't just make it illegal for employers to discriminate because of a person's sex. It also forbids discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. The decision extends workplace protections to millions of people. And it is a stunning defeat for the Trump administration, considering the court's conservative bent. In fact, the president's first nominee, Neil Gorsuch, wrote the opinion and joined Chief Justice John Roberts with the liberals to form the 6-3 majority. The 3 dissenting justices criticized the majority decision for what they see as amending the law rather than interpreting it. And there is something to be said about that. Until Congress protects this slice of America, they will not be safe. It does suggest hope for advancing that cause, but it comes at a critical juncture in our society where movements like this one, where thousands rallying in New York and around the country for black lives and black trans people this weekend, are proving the truth about America. If you want things to change, it has to start from the bottom up. Always the rule in this country. Thank you for watching CNN Tonight with D. Lemon right now.
And any other time, maybe on, I was saying any other time, it was any other day, that would have been a big lead story, right? We have so much going on in the world right now that a story that would have been the lead that is a mention. It's great news. And actually, in a way, it's, you know, I equate it to when people won't have to come out anymore, right? When you are assumed that you should be, and rightfully so, protected by the same Constitution and the same rules as everybody else, right?
Yeah.
Regardless if you're black, white, trans, straight, gay, whatever.
It is an issue that speaks to our obsession with the other in our culture. And until Congress acts, this is one that is about a pen stroke away. They need the law of Title VII, federal protection, to extend to the community. Until it does, we'll have to do this case by case, Don. Next it'll be adoption. Then it'll be about financing. Then it'll be about something else. Until you give them protection for all of it, they don't have any of it unless you go case by case, and that is a long walk.
Yeah. Well, it's extremely important to me, as you know, especially when it comes to my rights, being able to adopt kids. Look, I'm an old man. I'm thinking about adopting or having kids now. I don't know what the heck is going on. What's going on in this world? It's crazy.
Well, I mean, I think that there are many reasons you would be a great parent.
And many I wouldn't.
And no, I think you'll be a great parent. And I think what you know about yourself and how you live your truth of yourself is one of the biggest assets you have. It'll make you a better parent than someone like me.
Thank you. I'm glad I gave you that $200 yesterday just to say that.
I have never seen your wallet. I'm just saying. I literally am with him all the time. I don't know that he carries one.
I don't have a wallet.
I don't know that he has a money clip. I don't know what credit cards he has. I honestly have no clue.
My credit card says Christopher Cuomo.
I don't know what it says.
I've
I've never seen it happen. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. What's yours is mine. What's mine?
I'm fine with it. I'm just saying.
What is it? What's yours is mine, and what's mine is ours. Something. What's yours is ours, and what's mine.
Whatever.
Is
You don't
mine.
need to say it because you live it.
Yes. Thank you, sir. I shall see you soon.
I love you, Don Lemon.
And this thing, I don't know what's going on. Can you?
Don't be jealous.
No, it's embarrassing. If you can't grow hair, I mean, it's so embarrassing. And like, could you put some like Grecian formula or something on it, whatever it is, or
what, on the beard or my hair?
Well, the beard. What? That's not even a beard.
It's just getting going.
You've been growing it for 3 weeks.
That's not going to happen.
That's
not true.
Not going to happen.
That offends the facts.
Yeah, dye that thing.
My looks are not my problem.
Better still, I'm speaking for the boss, I'm sure. Shave it.
Wouldn't be the first time.
I'm going to buy you a razor.
Wouldn't be the first time.
I got a razor in my office that you can borrow.
Thank
All
you.
right, I got to get serious stuff. I got to run.
See you, buddy.
See you later. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. For 21 straight days now, 21, Americans around the country have taken to the streets to protest the death of George Floyd and to fight back against police brutality. Monumental change is happening in America. You heard what we were just talking about, what the Supreme Court did. Monumental change here. You can feel it in the streets. You can feel it in the air. But there is one person who is resisting change the most, and that's President Trump. As I said, change is all around us, and one change right now has to do with the president and how people respond to him. His usual bag of tricks, are they working for him anymore? Let's see. Well, let's start with tonight's breaking news on the NFL and how they have dealt with protests of racial injustice and their players. We know, of course, that for years Trump has lashed out at professional athletes for taking a knee during the national anthem to protest racial injustice in America.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired!
That whole fire thing, I mean, that was, you should have never make that face. It's don't make that face. But this whole idea about the flag, that argument will not wash anymore. This weekend he tweeted that he wouldn't be watching any sports that has its athletes kneeling. But the thing is, this time, people don't seem quite so scared of his threat. And in the wake of George Floyd's killing, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell said he supports Black Lives Matter. And tonight, he is encouraging one of the teams to sign Colin Kaepernick.
Well, listen, if he wants to resume his career in the NFL, that obviously is going to take a team to make that decision, but I welcome that, support the club making that decision, and encourage them to do that.
That's good. That would have been great a couple years ago. You know, it's not just athletes at the professional level who are having an impact on the change that is sweeping America. A star running back for Oklahoma State. Have you seen this story? His name is Chuba Hubbard. He took to Twitter to call out his team's head coach, Mike Gundy, Mike Grundy, for wearing a t-shirt with the logo for One America News. One America News is a far-right cable network that is a major supporter of President Trump. The Washington Post reports that a host on the network has called the Black Lives Matter movement a farce. The network regularly reports conspiracy theories. They, after all, are the network that put the false claim into the president's ear that the Buffalo protester Morton Gugino, who was hospitalized after being shoved to the ground by police, that he was an Antifa provocateur using a scanner to interfere with police, and it was all a setup. Well, that was not true, as we know. So Chuba Hubbard, he took a stand, saying that he wouldn't do anything with Oklahoma State until things change. And he got action. Here's what Coach Gundy said tonight, standing with Hubbard.
In light of today's tweet with the t-shirt I was wearing, I met with some players and realized it's a very sensitive issue with what's going on in today's society. And so we had a great meeting and made aware of some things that players feel like that can make our organization or our culture even better than it is here at Oklahoma State. And I'm looking forward to making some changes, and it starts at the top with me, and we got good days ahead.
It runs deep. It runs deep in our society. Did you have to do it because these star athletes, black athletes, were saying no? Did you have a change of heart? Why weren't you aware, as a head coach, that a shirt like that might not be something you want to wear, or would be controversial, or would offend certain people? Grown man, been around athletes for years, a lot of black ones.
He's ordered the city's vast army of COVID contact tracers not to ask people if they've been protesting. Well, that's not totally true. De Blasio did punish Brooklyn's Orthodox Jewish community for the heinous crime of going to the park. For their sins, de Blasio sent city workers to weld shut a park gate in the Jewish community of Borough Park in Brooklyn today. Now, the only thing that should be shut down at this point are the Democrats' political fundraising operations, given what's going on here. They need to be punished at the ballot box for how badly they botched this from day one. And at the same time, President Trump must convey a calm and confident message. I don't know, something akin to keep calm and wash your hands, don't sneeze on people. Now it's back to the work for the rest of us. Got to get our country back. He must also not allow states to unfairly punish their own residents with these prolonged freeze-outs in education and business. I mean, at some point, these shutdowns are tantamount to a state taking of property without due compensation. You see the constitutional argument I'm making. And that's a virus our American system will tolerate no longer. And that's it.
Video, and that's why this network has edited it at that point. Here is some of that video of Rayshard Brooks running away from the police officers. He's running out there in front of them, and then he's shot. The mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms, announced today that she is tightening the deadly force rule for Atlanta police officers, and in her press conference making that announcement, the mayor referred to the killing of Rayshard Brooks as a murder, and she said this.
I lost my father at 24 and I still cry about my daddy. And I would venture to say when I saw him run, if you all haven't watched the entirety of that body cam video, he talked about his daughter's birthday. And the first thing I thought when he ran was that he probably didn't want to be locked up over the weekend. And I know that because I know I've had family members in that position. They get locked up on the wrong day for something stupid. It didn't have to end that way. It didn't have to end that way. I mean, it's you know, it pissed me off. It makes me sad, and I'm frustrated. And nothing I can do is going to change what happened on Friday. All right, thank you.
Resuming what has become our ongoing discussion of this American way of death tonight are Gerald Griggs, he's an attorney and the first vice president of the Atlanta chapter of the NAACP. Mark Claxton is back with us. He's a former NYPD police detective and the director of the Black Law Enforcement Alliance. And Mark, let me just start with you as a police officer, looking at the tactics, looking at the way this situation develops. What do you see when you look at all of this video?
Absolutely avoidable death. You know, beyond the tragic death, an absolutely avoidable set of circumstances that ultimately lead to the death of Mr. Brooks. And I see the mayor's reaction and the reaction that so many black and brown people have about the empathy, about recognizing and acknowledging the humanity of people, about prioritizing ourselves. In law enforcement, I think too often there is a lack of priority in human life, especially as it pertains to black and brown people. And what's most painful and what's most troubling, and what the mayor expressed, that other people have expressed, I've expressed, is that in the video of the interaction with Rayshard, I recognize my own vulnerability, the vulnerability of other black and brown people in my family, my son's vulnerability, the community vulnerability. And that's what makes this especially troubling and difficult to deal with and address.
Let's listen to what Rayshard Brooks's cousin, Tiara Brooks, had to say today in Atlanta.
No matter what the different points of view are ours of his death, we must all agree to one fact. The fact that he was killed by the Atlanta Police Department. The fact that someone's cousin, brother, uncle, nephew, father, companion, and friend is no longer in this world. The trust that we have with the police force is broken. And the only way to heal some of these wounds is through a conviction and a drastic change with the police department.
Gerald Griggs, you're our expert on Georgia law. When you look at all of this video and the evidence that currently exists in this case, what do you see here from a legal perspective?
From a legal perspective, I see a killing that was avoidable. I believe that these officers violated Georgia's law. I believe they used unreasonable force, and I believe that a murder charge is warranted in this case. It's quite simple that it was a misdemeanor stop for DUI. It escalated after Mr. Brooks appeared to resist the officers because he didn't quite understand why he was being arrested. There was a scuffle. The scuffle, it appears Mr. Brooks got the better of the officers and was in the process of fleeing, and they could have used alternative means outside of using deadly force. So I believe that this particular case will proceed with an arrest and charges of felony murder, and I believe a trial will be coming.
Mark Claxton, the mayor announced today a significant tightening of the deadly force rule in the police department there, which seems to be modeled on Georgia law.